When you hear the words knife crime, what comes to mind? Blue lights, an ambulance, a young person, a city street. That's probably because those images we see most often. But after spending years researching violence and public health, I realized something. The phrase knife crime might actually be making prevention harder. Not because it's wrong, but because it's far too simple. Today, I want to show you why. We're going to look at three ideas. First, why knife crime isn't actually one single problem. Second, why hospitals only see one chapter of the story. And finally, why successful prevention often looks like absolutely nothing has happened. If we can understand these three ideas, I think we can begin to understand why reducing violence is so difficult and why it requires much more than reacting after someone has already been hurt. My name is Illin Gani. I'm the Brummie Researcher. So let's start with something that sounds really obvious. Part one, the problem with calling everything knife crime. Imagine I showed you four completely different scenarios. The first, a woman is threatened by her abusive partner inside her own home. The second, a teenager carries a knife because he's genuinely frightened someone is going to attack him. The third, someone is robbed late at night. The fourth, a disagreement outside a nightclub escalates into violence. These incidents are all different. Different people, different relationships, different locations, different motivations, different times. Yet we probably describe every one of them as knife crime. And that's where the problem starts, because once we put all of them into one box, we naturally start searching for one solution. But why should one solution fix four completely different problems? Imagine a doctor treating every patient with chest pain exactly the same. Whether it's anxiety, a heart attack, an indigestion, the doctor gives everyone identical treatment. Nobody would accept that. The symptom might look similar, but the cause isn't. Violence works in much the same way. The injury might involve a knife, but what led to that moment can be completely different. Fear, poverty, domestic abuse, criminal exploitation, mental illness, alcohol, arguments, trauma, social pressure. Each pathway looks different, which means prevention also looks different, which is one of the biggest shifts in public health thinking. Instead of asking, how do we stop knife crime? We ask, what exactly are we trying to prevent? Because if we don't understand the problem properly, how can we expect to design the right solution? Data can actually mislead us. Now, here's where things become even more interesting. Different organizations see completely different versions of violence. Police see recorded offenses, hospitals see injuries, GPs sees long-term health problems. Schools might notice attendance falling. Youth workers see family solutions. Community organizations hear stories that never appear in official records. Every organization sees something very different, but none of them sees everything. Imagine trying to complete a jigsaw puzzle when everyone only owns a handful of pieces. One person thinks it's this picture of a beach, another person thinks it's a forest, another thinks it's a city. Nobody's actually wrong. They just don't have the whole picture. That's often what violence research feels like. And we're constantly trying to build a bigger picture from lots of smaller ones, which is why researchers rarely rely on one data source. The more perspectives we can combine, the closer we get to understanding reality. Part two, the hospital isn't the end of the story. Let's imagine this. A 19-year-old is stabbed. An ambulance arrives. They're rushed to hospital. Surgeons save their lives. They stay in the hospital for several days. After several days, they're discharged. If you only looked at hospital data, that's where the story ends. Patients discharged, gates closed, But is it? What happens 6 months later? What happens a year later? Maybe they can't sleep anymore. Maybe loud noises make them panic. Maybe they stop seeing friends. Maybe they're scared to use public transport. Maybe they leave education. Maybe they lose their job. Maybe they're diagnosed with PTSD. Maybe anxiety starts affecting every part of their daily life. None of these things happen in the emergency department, they happen afterwards. This is something I don't think we talk about enough. Emergency medicine saves lives and it is absolutely essential. But surviving violence isn't the same thing as recovering from violence. Recovering can take months, sometimes years. Sometimes it affects every part of someone's lives: relationships, education, employment, mental health, confidence, trust. Now think about something. Which organization actually sees all of it? The hospital doesn't, the police doesn't, school don't, employers don't, mental health services don't. Everybody sees one chapter. Very few people see the whole book. That's why linked data has become so important in research. It allows us to carefully connect information across different parts of the system, not to avoid people's privacy, but to answer better questions. What happens after the hospital? How many people develop mental health problems? How many return with another issue? Where are people falling through the gaps? Because if we only study the emergency, we might completely miss the recovery. And recovery is where public health has so much to contribute. Part three: why prevention is almost invisible. Now, here's my favorite idea, and honestly, I think it's one of the hardest things to explain to people. If prevention works, nothing happens. Think about that for a second. Nobody gets stabbed, nobody calls an ambulance, nobody trends on social media. The biggest success is something that's never happened, which creates a huge problem for us because humans are brilliant at noticing events. We're terrible at noticing events that didn't happen. Imagine a youth worker spends 2 years supporting one teenager. They build trust, they support the family, connect them with mental health services. 5 years later, that young person never becomes involved in serious violence. Will that make national news? Probably not, because there's no dramatic moment. Nothing happened. But maybe that was one of the biggest success imaginable. The same is true across public health, vaccination programs, smoking prevention, road safety, early cancer screening, mental health support. When they work, life simply carries on. And because nothing's dramatic has happened, people sometimes question whether they were needed at all. That's why prevention is often undervalued. It's difficult to celebrate something that's never occurred, but that doesn't make it any less important. And activity isn't the same as impact. That's another mistake we often make. We confuse activity with success. A program delivers 100 workshops, great, thumbs up. 500 young people attended, excellent. Thousands of leaflets distributed, fantastic. Those numbers tell us work happened. They don't automatically tell us harm has reduced. That's a very different question. Good evaluation asks harder question. Did violence actually fall? Did people feel safe? Did repeat victimization reduce? Did young people receive support earlier? Did services work together better? Sometimes the answer is yes, and sometimes the answer is no. Sometimes we generally don't know, and researchers have to be comfortable saying we're not certain yet. I actually think that's one of the strengths of research, admitting uncertainty, because real life is messy, people are messy, communities are messy, violence doesn't happen because of one single factor. So, why would preventing it be simple? So, where does this all leave us? I think these three ideas fit together quite nicely. First, knife crime isn't a singular problem. There's multiple forms of violence that have different causes. Second, emergency departments don't tell the full story, and it's much longer story in reality. The health, the psychological and social consequences often continue long after someone leaves hospital. And finally, successful prevention is often invisible. When it works, nothing happens. No headlines, no ambulances, no police tape, just another ordinary day. And maybe that's exactly what success should look like. A young person goes home safely, a family gets support before reaching crisis, someone receives help early so that violence never becomes part of their life. Those stories rarely make it into the news, but they're probably the stories we should care about the most, because the ultimate goal of public health isn't responding better after the harm occurs. It's creating the conditions where harm becomes less likely in the first place. That doesn't replace policing, that doesn't replace emergency medicine, it complements them. Public health asks a different question, not simply how do we respond, but how do we stop people needing that response in the first place. I think that's one of the most important conversations we can have, because understanding the problem is always a first towards preventing it. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, consider subscribing to my YouTube channel and to my other social media platforms. Here on this channel, I will break down complex public health research, violence prevention, and health inequalities into plain English so that evidence isn't locked up away in academic journals. I'll see you in the next one.